Hello, my online kids. Today we're going to learn about the Mexican-American War, and this is one of those events that there is a clear, direct path from the Mexican-American War to the Civil War. And again, it's all about geography. So, and what I mean by geography is just like location, location, location. And as the United States starts to expand into that new location, just because of geographic coincidence, the people who made it there sooner and started to impart their values and customs and economic values, I should say, um, really brought about more of attention prior to the Civil War. So let's dig into this. Um, this is one of those articles with a lot of awesome pictures in it, and I'm going to try to keep this as short and sweet as possible. Um, I do tend to like over explain some things. I should just let the article speak for itself. Either way, here we go. In the early decades of the 1800s, white settlers moved west along the Oregon Trail from the Mississippi River to the Pacific coast. They traveled across and settled on land that belonged to Native Americans. Americans dreamt that their country might one day fulfill its manifest destiny, the idea that the United States should span the continent from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. Most of these settlers went to the Northwest, to territories that belonged to the United States. Very few American settlers went to California at the time. California was a part of Mexico and was not a popular destination. That dream grew stronger in the 1840s. On January 24th, 1848, James W. Marshall discovered gold on the land of John Sutter's sawmill in California's Sacramento Valley. Marshall's find sparked the California gold rush. California all of a sudden seemed interesting. Thousands of Americans and immigrants from Mexico, Europe, and China flocked to the land, hoping to strike it rich. At the time that gold was found, California belonged to Mexico. 2 years later, however, it would be the newest state in the United States. And keep that in mind, 1848. That's when gold was discovered. How did the Mexican territory of California become part of the United States? You could say that the story begins farther east in Texas, forming the Texas Republic. In 1821, Mexico hoped to attract new settlers to its northern areas, including Texas. It gave generous grants or gifts of land to settlers. New immigrants, mostly from the southern United States, poured into Texas, many bringing their enslaved workers. However, the new Texans did not share Mexican cultural values. In 1829, Mexico outlawed slavery and required all new immigrants to convert to Catholicism. American settlers in Texas, called Texians, largely ignored these rules. In response, Mexican authorities closed their territory to any new immigration in 1830, but some Americans kept coming. The conflict between the Texians and the Mexican government continued. In 1834, a struggle for control of the Mexican government led to General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna taking power. He threw out the existing constitution, which gave provinces such as Texas some degree of self-rule. Texians and many Tejanos, Texans of Mexican descent, opposed this action. They issued a statement that declared Texas to be a separate state within Mexico. When the Mexican government rejected that claim, the Texas rebels declared independence. War followed. At the Alamo and Goliad, Santa Anna crushed their smaller rebel forces and massacred hundreds of Texian prisoners. For the rebellion Texian soldiers, independence seemed unlikely. But then the historic Battle of the Alamo turned the tides. Santa Anna was defeated in a surprise attack by the outnumbered Texian army, led by Sam Houston on April 21st, 1836. Santa Anna was captured and forced to sign the Treaty of Velasco. He agreed in that treaty to withdraw his army from Texas and acknowledge Texan independence. The United States quickly recognized the new Republic of Texas. Mexico, however, did not. While Santa Anna was captive, a new Mexican government came to power, and that government refused to recognize the treaty. American politicians debated whether to annex or take control of Texas. Many, especially in the South, wanted to. They were eager to add another slave state. Many Northerners opposed adding Texas because they did not want to upset the balance between free states and slave states. Some also feared that adding Texas to the Union would start a war with Mexico. President John Tyler wanted Texas. John Tyler, by the way, was the president after William Henry Harrison, the Indiana president. But Congress was split over the idea. In March 1845, during the final days of his presidency, Tyler invited Texas to join the Union. The Republic accepted on July 4th, becoming the 28th state. Mexico denounced the annexation. It also rejected Polk's claim that the Rio Grande marked the border between Texas and Mexico. Mexico's government said the border was roughly 150 miles farther north at the Nueces River. So the United States wanted that border down here. Mexico wanted it up here. It's pretty much a territorial dispute. And we're off to war. In November 1845, newly elected President Polk, James K. Polk, secretly sent John Slidell to Mexico City to purchase Mexican territory. Polk believed in manifest destiny. This is the idea that Americans had the right and even the responsibility to settle North America from the Atlantic to the Pacific Oceans. Polk had his eye on California. If the United States could get control of California, its manifest destiny would be complete. And there's that picture that you've already commented on. Again, it comes up again, and it's relevant. As Slidell expected, Mexican officials refused to receive him. Meanwhile, Polk also sent a 4,000-man army under General Zachary Taylor to Corpus Christi, Texas. When he learned of Mexico's response to Slidell, Polk ordered Taylor to lead troops into the disputed territory. The president hoped the show of force would push Mexico to the bargaining table. He badly misread the situation, however. Popular opinion left the Mexican government unwilling to negotiate. On April 24th, 1846, Mexican cavalrymen attacked a group of Taylor's troops in the disputed territory, killing 11 soldiers. Knowing public support would be strong, Polk quickly asked Congress for a declaration of war. Congress issued the declaration and a call for 50,000 volunteer soldiers on May 13th. The war moved quickly and was marked by several American successes. In the fall of 1846, American troops invaded Mexico and within a year's time had captured Mexico City. However, the city's fall did not bring an end to the war. General Winfield Scott's men occupied Mexico's capital for over 4 months while the two countries negotiated a peace agreement. Disease killed 7 times as many American soldiers as did combat, something that in any war usually is the case. Peace finally came on February 2nd, 1848, a week after Marshall's discovery of gold at Sutter's Mill, with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And there's the traditional map that we know of it. Terms of peace give fuel to the slavery debate. The treaty gave the United States huge territorial gains at Mexico's expense. Mexico gave up about half its territory, including all of the future states of California, Utah, and Nevada, most of Arizona and New Mexico, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. Mexico also surrendered its claim to Texas and accepted the Rio Grande as its border. The United States gave Mexico $15 million in exchange for the land. It was a bitter defeat for Mexicans to swallow. The war and the resulting treaty had critics in the United States. Some thought the war was unjustified. Many in the North feared that the addition of Texas and other areas would mean the spread of slavery. The Mexican-American War heightened the political struggle between free and slave states. Southern politicians wanted to extend slavery into New Mexico, Arizona, and California. Northerners complained that this was a land grab by what they called the slave power. And again, I really like this map. And not only do I like this map, I do like the little box down here on the left, slave states and the free states. And you can see how the little power struggle really built up into the start of the Civil War. So where we're at right now in the Mexican-American War is like right in here. And in terms of number of states, we still at this time have more slave states than free states. But as you can see, those free state numbers are going to go up. Meanwhile, the California gold rush meant that region now had enough people to become a state. The addition of these new territories was upsetting the balance of power in the country. In the resulting compromise of 1850, California was admitted as a free state. The people of New Mexico territory were allowed to vote on whether or not to allow slavery. As part of the compromise, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act, which made it easier to claim that African Americans in the North had escaped slavery and to bring them to the South. While the compromise settled matters, it left bitter feelings. No one was happy with the results. Disagreements over the question of slavery in the territories would erupt again in the 1850s, and a decade later lead to the Civil War, the changing West. The other losers in the war were the thousands of Native Americans and Mexicans living in the new US territories. In California, Mexican settlers known as Californios lost power and influence. During the gold rush, American miners often seized or squatted on their land, and Californio miners were heavily taxed. Discrimination against Mexican Americans began in this period. Some Californios lost their land as newly arrived white Americans refused to recognize land titles that had been granted during Spanish or Mexican rule of the area. Can I teach class? Thank you. It's a dispute. Sorry. As more Americans moved into Texas, the pattern of new settlers discriminating against early settlers continued. Tejanos were outnumbered. They came to be mistreated too. Over time, English speakers dominated Texas and discriminated against Mexican Americans. People of Mexican descent fared better in New Mexico. English-speaking Americans moved into the area, following the Santa Fe Trail that connected that city to Independence, Missouri. Many set up ranches or mines. Native American groups in these areas also suffered. Groups that had gotten along with Mexico's government found the United States government less cooperative. Disease and conflict virtually wiped out the native peoples of California. Tribes such as the Navajo were driven from their homes, and many died on the forced march to reservations. The gain of new territories created new political problems. Like you're a political problem right now, Kitty. Excuse me. For example, California was isolated from the rest of the country. It took at least 3 months to get news and supplies. Throughout the 1850s, Californians asked Congress for a transcontinental railroad to allow for faster movement of people and goods between the Pacific coast and the states back east. This request added to the conflict between North and South. Northern leaders wanted the railroad to take a northern route. Southern politicians wanted to build a southern route. Because of the disagreements, nothing got done. The influx of white settlers added to an already diverse population, in many cases creating an unequal dynamic. The region from Texas to California had a cultural mix of people, with English speakers and Spanish speakers of Mexican descent the main groups. Enslaved African Americans were an important part of the Texas population, but they had no rights. Some Native American groups were able to follow traditional ways of life, particularly the Pueblo peoples of New Mexico. By the end of the 1850s, Chinese and Mexican immigrants made up 1/5 of the mining population in California. Across the region, English-speaking white people dominated business, society, and government. The different ethnic groups worked together at times, but clashed with one another at other times. The Mexican-American War marked a milestone in U.S. history. The territory acquired in the war not only added to the narrative of manifest destiny, it also fed the national debate about over slavery. The movement of settlers, especially in the years of the California Gold Rush, added to an already diverse population in the newly acquired territory. That population growth led, in later years, to the building of a transcontinental railroad and wars for control of Native American land. So, pretty big article. There's a lot to break down, and I really like how this article starts talking about California again. But now we're in it. In terms of where we're going with this class, the Mexican-American War really starts to bring conflict to a head in the United States. People in the South wanted Texas to become a state, and they really wanted it to become a state because there were Southerners who were settling in Texas. Those Southerners brought with them slaves. But there's another state out there that wanted to be a free state, and that's California. We've already talked a little bit about California, and I'm glad we're bringing it up again, especially when we're talking about it in the context of Texas as well. So today's lesson was about a war against a foreign power, Mexico, but it really begins to set the stage for a domestic issue, the Civil War. All right. Have a good weekend, and I will be back on Monday. More stuff. See ya.